No one could get close to the CEO's daughter until the single dad janitor did the unexpected. What seemed to be just another emotionally distant heiress, untouchable and surrounded by luxury, held a deep brokenness hidden beneath her perfect facade. A single dad janitor working the night shift was the only one who saw it. We're going to tell the story of how a man who cleaned floors at night became the one person who could reach her heart. What would make the daughter of the most powerful man choose the janitor? Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a galaxy of manufactured light and calculated smiles. Crystal chandeliers dripped diamonds of light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. This was the natural habitat of Robert Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Global Properties, a man who didn't just build skyscrapers but curated entire skylines. And standing at his side was his daughter, Clara Sullivan, who represented both his greatest achievement and his deepest frustration. Clara was a masterpiece of quiet elegance. Dressed in a column of deep emerald silk that shimmered like captured twilight, she was achingly beautiful. But her beauty was that of a flawless marble statue, cold, distant, and utterly untouchable. All night, powerful and ambitious men orbited around her, men who saw her not as a person, but as the final jewel in a crown of success. They tried to charm her with anecdotes of their latest acquisitions, with witty remarks polished by Ivy League debate teams, with smiles that promised power and partnership. To each one, Clara offered the same polite, vacant smile. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, would meet theirs for a moment, but she never truly saw them. She was a ghost at the feast, a beautiful echo in a room full of noise. Among these men, Ethan Hayes stood out as the most persistent. He was a junior partner at her father's firm and the man Robert had handpicked as Clara's designated suitor. Ethan was handsome in the way a magazine advertisement is handsome, symmetrical, airbrushed, and entirely without surprise. "Clara, you're looking breathtaking tonight," he murmured, his hand hovering near the small of her back. "That new gallery wing your father funded is the talk of the town. A true legacy." "Yes, my father is very proud," she replied, her voice a soft, melodic monotone. She took a sip of champagne, her gaze drifting over his shoulder to a painting on the far wall. "We should get a photo together," Ethan pressed, already signaling a photographer. "For the company's social feed. The future of Sullivan Global." "I don't think so, Ethan," she said, her voice still gentle but with an edge of finality that was as effective as a slammed door. She gave him a small, dismissive nod and drifted away, leaving him standing there with his perfect smile frozen in place. From across the room, Robert Sullivan watched this exchange, and a familiar knot of frustration tightened in his chest. He saw the perfection of his daughter, her poise, her beauty, the way she wore his wealth like a second skin. But he also saw the emptiness beneath it all. She was a CEO's daughter, yet she had no ambition. She was a beautiful woman, yet she showed no passion. She was meant to be his legacy, but instead she felt hollow to him. He needed her to be a partner, a symbol, a queen for the empire he had built. Instead, she was a beautiful, silent rebellion against everything he'd planned. Hours later, long after the last of the champagne had been poured and the final empty compliment had been offered, the 57th floor of the Sullivan Global Tower stood silent. The entire floor was Robert Sullivan's executive suite, a sprawling testament to power, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked down on the city like the unblinking eyes of a god. But for Marcus Rivera, it was just another zone to clean. Marcus moved through the cavernous space with a quiet efficiency that rendered him nearly invisible. He wasn't just a janitor, he was a craftsman of cleanliness. He saw the faint smudges on the glass walls, the dust motes dancing in the moonlight, the subtle scuffs on the Italian marble, and he erased them all, restoring order to a world that was not his own. His life was built on stark contrasts. By night he polished the artifacts of immense wealth, By day, he lived in a small three-room apartment in Queens, a space filled not with art and steel, but with the scent of crayon wax, the clutter of children's books, and the sound of a 7-year-old girl's laughter. His daughter, Luna, was the sun around which his entire universe revolved. Tonight, as he wiped down the vast empty expanse of Robert Sullivan's mahogany desk, his mind was on her. She had a field trip tomorrow, and he'd stayed up late the night before packing her a special lunch, complete with a note that he'd illustrated with a cartoon rocket ship. The memory made him smile. His own dreams of designing buildings, of shaping skylines himself, had been put on hold the day Luna's mother had left. Those dreams had been shelved permanently when Luna's asthma required a series of expensive treatments, and a parent who could provide unwavering stability over ambition. A janitor's job at a major corporation offered good insurance, and, most importantly, hours that meant he was always home to tuck her in at night and make her breakfast in the morning. He had traded his blueprints for a floor buffer, and he had never once regretted it. He moved from the CEO's office into the adjoining smaller office, which belonged to Clara Sullivan. It was as minimalist and pristine as she was. But on her desk, amidst the stark emptiness, sat a single ornate silver frame. Inside was a photograph of a younger Clara, maybe 16, laughing with a woman who had the same clear gray eyes. Her mother, Marcus guessed. He'd heard the whispers among the staff that she had passed away years ago. It was the only object in the entire room that felt real, that hinted at any genuine emotion. He was about to move on when the elevator chimed. The sound was so unusual at this hour that it made him pause. The doors slid open, and Clara Sullivan herself stepped out. She was still in her emerald gown, but her perfect composure was completely gone. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes were shadowed, and she moved like someone walking in her sleep. She didn't seem to see him. She walked directly to her office, her movements stiff and mechanical. Marcus, trained in the art of invisibility, simply stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, intending to wait until she left. Clara stood before her desk, her gaze fixed on the silver frame. She reached for it, her fingers trembling slightly. And then, it happened. Her hand spasmed, a tiny involuntary flinch, and the frame slipped from her grasp. It hit the marble floor with a sickening crack, the glass shattering into a spiderweb of 1,000 tiny pieces. The sound broke the silence of the tower, and it seemed to break something inside Clara, too. A choked sob escaped her lips. She sank into her chair, her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent, racking grief. She didn't weep loudly. It was a quiet, desperate, internal collapse, the kind of pain that had clearly been building for a very long time. Marcus's heart went out to her. He could have stayed hidden. He could have pretended he saw nothing. That was his job, after all, to be invisible. But he couldn't. He thought of Luna, and the instinct to comfort a person in pain overrode every professional protocol. He stepped quietly into the office. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "Can I help?" He knew those words were meaningless. Instead, he walked past her, retrieved a small dustpan and brush from his cart, and knelt down. With meticulous care, he began sweeping up the shards of glass. Clara lifted her head, her face pale and streaked with tears. She watched him, confused. "What are you doing?" Marcus didn't look at her, focusing on his task. His voice was low and calm. "In Japan," he began softly, his hands moving with gentle precision, "there is an art form called Kintsugi. When a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They repair it. They use a special lacquer mixed with powdered gold." He carefully picked up the largest piece of glass, which still held a fragment of the smiling mother's face. "They believe," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. The lines of gold become part of its history. They don't hide the damage. They illuminate it. They celebrate it." He finished sweeping up the last of the glass into the dustpan. He then carefully removed the photograph from the now bent silver frame and placed it gently on her desk blotter, next to the frame itself. He stood up, ready to leave. He had done what he could. "Wait," Clara said, her voice hoarse. She looked from the broken frame to his face, and for the first time her gray eyes truly saw him. They saw not a janitor, not an employee, but a person. "What's your name?" "Marcus Rivera." "Marcus," she repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. "Thank you." He simply nodded and walked out of the office, leaving her alone in the quiet. Clara stared at the broken frame and the pristine photograph, her tears having stopped. For years, everyone in her life had tried to shore up her cracks, to paint over her sadness, to pretend the broken parts of her didn't exist. And here, a janitor, a stranger, had just told her that her brokenness could be a source of beauty. It was the most unexpected and most profound thing anyone had ever done for her. That Kintsugi conversation became a turning point, a fissure in the dam of Clara's solitude. She started staying late at the office, not out of obligation anymore, but with a quiet, fluttering hope that she might see Marcus again. She would sit at her desk, pretending to work, her ears attuned to the faint squeak of his cleaning cart in the hallway. Their encounters were brief at first, little islands of conversation in an ocean of corporate silence. She learned about Luna, about her fierce love for drawing and her wild imagination. Marcus spoke of his daughter with a light in his eyes that Clara had never seen in any man, a pure, unselfish adoration that felt like a foreign language she desperately wanted to learn. Marcus, in turn, learned about Clara. He learned that her silence was not arrogance, but a shield, a way to protect herself. He saw the keen intelligence in her eyes when she spoke about art, the way she could dissect a painting's composition, with a passion that was entirely absent when she discussed company mergers. He saw the loneliness she tried so hard to hide. One evening, she found him on his break, sitting in an empty conference room, sketching in a small notebook. He tried to hide it, embarrassed, but she asked to see. He reluctantly showed her. The pages were filled with fantastical architectural designs, towers that twisted like seashells, bridges that looked like woven strands of light, buildings that seemed to grow organically from the earth. They were brilliant, full of life and imagination, completely different from the cold corporate structures of Sullivan Global. "You're an architect," she whispered, stunned. "I was, a long time ago," he said with a shrug, though she could see the flicker of old dreams in his eyes. Life had other plans. The true turning point, the moment that transformed their quiet connection into something undeniable, came on a rainy Tuesday. Marcus's babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and with no other option, he had been forced to bring Luna with him for the first couple of hours of his shift. He set her up with a box of crayons and a stack of paper in the empty mailroom, hoping she would remain unseen and entertained. But Luna Rivera was not one to remain unseen. Clara was working late, as she now always did, when she saw a flash of color from under her office door. A piece of paper had been slid into the room. She bent down and picked it up. It was a child's drawing, simple but meaningful. A stick figure of a woman with long brown hair, wearing a green dress. She was standing inside a big, lopsided heart. But the heart was cracked down the middle, and the crack was filled in with a thick, bright yellow crayon line, like gold. A moment later, Marcus appeared at her door, his face pale with panic. "Miss Sullivan, I am so sorry. Luna, she wandered off. I told her to stay put." But Clara wasn't listening. She was staring at the drawing, a lump forming in her throat. She knelt down and looked at the little girl hiding behind her father's legs. "Did you draw this for me?" Clara asked softly. Luna nodded shyly. "Daddy told me a story about a sad lady in a glass office," she whispered, "and about how broken things can be the prettiest. So I drew you with a golden heart." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She looked up at Marcus, her expression a mixture of awe and something much deeper. He had not only seen her brokenness, he had shared it with his daughter, reframed it in a story that had come back to her as an offering of pure, innocent acceptance. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. From that moment on, the pretense fell away completely. Their late-night talks became the anchor of her days. She found herself laughing, a real, uninhibited sound that echoed strangely in the empty offices. She felt a thawing inside her, a slow, tentative return of warmth to places that had been frozen for years. This change did not go unnoticed. Ethan Hayes saw it first. He noticed the new light in Clara's eyes, the faint, lingering smile on her lips, and it infuriated him. He had been working for months to elicit even a fraction of that warmth, and had failed completely. His jealousy, sharp and venomous, drove him to investigate. It didn't take him long to find the source. He saw them one night talking by the elevators, and the sight of Clara looking at the janitor with genuine affection filled him with a disgusted rage. He was determined to crush this ridiculous infatuation before it went any further. Robert Sullivan noticed the change too, but initially he was thrilled. He assumed Ethan's persistence had finally paid off. "I knew he had it in him," he boasted to a board member. "The boy's a closer. He'll be a fine husband for Clara. Good for the company." His delight turned to horror when Ethan presented him with the truth, along with a carefully curated file. "It's not me, Robert," Ethan said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's him, the janitor, Marcus Rivera." He tossed the file onto Robert's desk. "And it gets worse. He's not just some sob story. He was an architect at Sterling Cooper Designs, our biggest rival. Fired 5 years ago. The internal records are sealed, but the rumor is it was for gross incompetence and attempting to steal proprietary designs." He leaned in, delivering the killing blow. "He's a failed, disgraced corporate spy who is now manipulating your daughter." The single dad act is just his way in. Robert's face turned purple with rage. The humiliation was unbearable. His daughter, the heir to his empire, was being seduced by the help, by what he believed was a disgraced, manipulative charity case. That night, he bypassed Clara entirely and went straight for the source. He cornered Marcus in the service corridor, his presence radiating a cold, menacing power. "I know who you are, Rivera," Robert snarled. "I know what you are. The game is over." He slid a check across a nearby countertop. It was for $250,000. "Take this and disappear. If I ever see you near my daughter again, I will not only destroy you, I will make sure you are declared an unfit parent. I will bury you in legal fees until you lose that little girl of yours. Do you understand me?" Marcus looked at the check, then into the cold, merciless eyes of Robert Sullivan. He thought of Clara's fragile, emerging smile. He thought of Luna's drawing of the golden heart. He calmly pushed the check back across the counter. "Your daughter is the kindest person I have ever met, Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You clearly have no idea how lucky you are." He turned and walked away, leaving Robert Sullivan sputtering in a cloud of his own impotent fury. The war had been declared, and Marcus had just refused to surrender. The crisis came soon after in the form of the Phoenix Project, the crowning jewel of Sullivan Global's portfolio. It was a massive $2 billion skyscraper set to redefine the city's skyline. The design, created by a world-renowned but notoriously arrogant architect, was visually stunning but functionally flawed. Deep in the complex engineering plans was a critical miscalculation in the load-bearing structure for the central atrium, a flaw that would cause catastrophic failure if not fixed. The firm's best engineers were in a panic, unable to find a solution that didn't involve a year-long delay and a complete, humiliating redesign. The mood in the executive suite was apocalyptic. Robert Sullivan was like a caged lion, roaring at everyone. Ethan was scrambling, trying to deflect blame. The empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. Clara watched the chaos unfold, and an idea, both terrifying and brilliant, began to form in her mind. She knew Marcus's past. She had seen his notebooks filled with those incredible designs. She believed in his genius. That night, she smuggled a copy of the Phoenix Project's core blueprints out of the office. She found Marcus in his small Queens apartment. Luna was asleep in the next room. Clara spread the massive blueprints across his kitchen table, her heart pounding. "They're going to lose the project," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "There's a flaw in the atrium design, and no one can fix it." Marcus looked at her, then down at the complex web of lines and numbers spread before him. For a long moment he didn't move. He was a janitor now. This world was no longer his. But then he saw the desperate hope in Clara's eyes. He saw the faith she was placing in him. He pulled up a chair and bent over the plans. He worked all night. Clara sat with him, keeping him supplied with coffee, watching as the intense focus transformed his gentle face. He didn't just look at the engineering, he looked at the building's soul, its purpose, what it was meant to be. "That's the problem," he said just before dawn, his voice rough with exhaustion. "It's not just a structural flaw. It's a design flaw. The building is arrogant. It doesn't connect with the ground, with the people. It has no heart." He took a piece of tracing paper and laid it over the central atrium design. His hand, so used to holding a broom, moved with the fluid grace of a master artist. He didn't just fix the load-bearing issue, he completely reimagined the space. He replaced the cold, empty atrium with a multi-level terraced indoor park, with a spiraling walkway and a self-sustaining waterfall. He sketched in public spaces, small amphitheaters, and areas for local art installations. It was a design that solved the engineering problem by introducing a radical, beautiful, and deeply human new concept. It gave the building a soul. He had infused it with Kintsugi, making it stronger and more beautiful at the point where it had been broken. The next morning, Clara walked into the emergency board meeting. Her father, Ethan, and a dozen panicked executives looked up as she entered, surprised to see her there. "I have a solution," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound confidence. She laid Marcus's sketch on the table. There was a stunned silence, then a flurry of excited murmurs as the engineers and architects saw the genius of it. "This is brilliant," the lead engineer said, his eyes wide with awe. "It actually works. It more than works, it transforms the entire project." "Whose design is this?" Robert demanded. "It's from the one person who understood what the project was missing," Clara said, her gaze sweeping across the room and landing on Ethan. "It's the work of Marcus Rivera." "The janitor?" Ethan scoffed, regaining his composure. "That's absurd. He's a disgraced fraud who was fired from Sterling Cooper for incompetence." "That's a lie," Clara said, her voice cold as ice. She placed a second file on the table. "I made some calls last night to a friend who works in HR at Sterling Cooper. Marcus Rivera wasn't fired for incompetence. He resigned. He left the most promising career of his generation to care for his sick daughter. The sealed records were a fiction you created, Ethan, because you couldn't bear the thought of a janitor being a better man than you. The truth landed with the force of a physical blow." Ethan's face crumbled. Robert stared at his daughter, truly seeing her for the first time. She was no longer a hollow statue. She was a queen, defending her champion, wielding the truth like a sword. He then looked at the sketch on the table, the work of the man he had tried to destroy. The design wasn't just brilliant, it was full of a warmth and humanity that he secretly wished his own company possessed. The janitor hadn't just saved his building. He had shown him what his legacy was truly missing. Weeks later, Marcus Rivera walked through the lobby of the Sullivan Global Tower. He was no longer wearing a janitor's uniform but a simple, well-fitting blazer. He nodded at the staff, who now greeted him with a mixture of awe and respect. He was the new head of the Special Projects Design Division, a position he had accepted on his own terms, no late nights, and full flexibility to always be there for Luna. He met Clara by the elevators. She smiled, a real radiant smile that reached her clear gray eyes. "Ready to go?" "Always," he said, taking her hand. They walked out of the building together, leaving the world of glass and steel behind them. They met Luna at the entrance to Central Park, and the three of them walked into the golden light of the late afternoon. Luna ran ahead, chasing pigeons, her laughter echoing in the crisp air. Marcus squeezed Clara's hand. "Look," he said, pointing to the sky where the silhouette of a crane marked the construction site of the Phoenix Project. "That's where it's going to be." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, watching her new family against the backdrop of the city. She had spent her life feeling broken in a world that demanded perfection. And a single father, a janitor, had done the unexpected. He hadn't tried to fix her. He had simply shown her that the broken places were where the light and the gold got in.